Imagine sitting across the table from someone who has committed an unthinkable crime, yet they're smiling. They're calm, confident, almost charming. They lean back in their chair, meet the investigator's eyes without hesitation, and begin to speak, not with fear or remorse, but with a sense of control. Now ask yourself this question: what kind of mind feels powerful while being interrogated for a crime? Today, we're stepping inside that mind. This is not fiction. These are real criminal interrogations, real psychological profiles, and real behaviors repeatedly documented by forensic psychologists, criminologists, and law enforcement professionals. This is the world of narcissism, where ego, manipulation, and a distorted sense of self collide with the justice system. And once you understand how these minds work, you'll never watch an interrogation the same way again. Narcissism, in a clinical sense, exists on a spectrum. At one end, there are people with strong self-confidence and ambition. At the other end, there are individuals diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, a condition defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. These individuals display patterns of grandiosity, a constant need for admiration, and a profound lack of empathy. In criminal contexts, those traits can become dangerous. When narcissistic individuals are interrogated, their behavior often follows strikingly consistent patterns. They don't react like most suspects. Fear, shame, and guilt, emotions that often surface during questioning, are either absent or carefully concealed. Instead, narcissistic suspects tend to focus on image management. The interrogation room becomes a stage, and the investigator becomes an audience. One of the most documented traits of narcissistic offenders is their belief in their own intellectual superiority. Many enter interrogations convinced they can outsmart trained detectives. Studies published in forensic psychology journals show that narcissistic offenders frequently overestimate their ability to deceive others. This overconfidence leads them to talk more than they should, offer unnecessary explanations, and sometimes contradict themselves without realizing it. Interrogators often note that narcissistic suspects enjoy the attention. The longer the questioning goes on, the more they talk, not because they're breaking down, but because they're performing. They want to be seen as intelligent, misunderstood, or even impressive. Some attempt to align themselves with investigators, subtly shifting the dynamic from suspect versus detective to two smart people having a conversation. This need for admiration becomes especially visible when investigators apply pressure. A non-narcissistic suspect may become anxious, withdrawn, or defensive. A narcissistic suspect, on the other hand, may respond with indignation. They feel insulted by the implication that they could be guilty. Not because they fear punishment, but because their self-image has been challenged. In real interrogation transcripts, narcissistic suspects often correct investigators, question their competence, or reframe events to portray themselves as victims. They may say things like, "You're not understanding this properly," or "I'm actually the one who was wronged here." This isn't deflection alone, it's identity preservation. Accepting guilt would mean accepting imperfection, and for a narcissist, that can be psychologically intolerable. Another hallmark behavior is blame shifting. Narcissistic offenders rarely accept responsibility, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. Instead, they redirect blame to circumstances, other people, or systems. In documented homicide interrogations, some narcissistic suspects have blamed victims for forcing their actions or accused law enforcement of bias and incompetence, rather than addressing the facts. What makes these interrogations especially chilling is the emotional detachment. Numerous forensic assessments reveal that narcissistic offenders often describe violent acts with flat affect or detached curiosity. They may recount events in detail, but without emotional engagement, as though they're narrating a story that happened to someone else. This lack of empathy isn't always dramatic, it's subtle, and that subtlety is what makes it disturbing. However, not all narcissistic suspects are cold. Some display what psychologists call instrumental emotion. They cry on command, express outrage when it benefits them, or show selective remorse if they believe it will improve their situation. Importantly, this emotional display often disappears the moment it stops serving a purpose. Interrogators trained in behavioral analysis look for inconsistencies between emotional expression and narrative content. For example, a suspect may describe a traumatic event while showing no physiological signs of stress, steady breathing, relaxed posture, and minimal facial tension. These observations don't prove guilt on their own, but they often raise red flags that prompt deeper scrutiny. One critical mistake investigators can make is confronting narcissistic suspects too aggressively too early. Research from law enforcement training programs shows that direct challenges can trigger power struggles. When narcissists feel cornered, they may shut down completely or escalate into hostility, refusing further cooperation. Instead, skilled interrogators often use a counterintuitive strategy: controlled validation. They acknowledge the suspect's intelligence, competence, or perspective, not to agree with them, but to keep them talking. This approach feeds the narcissist's need for recognition, while gradually guiding the conversation toward contradictions and factual inconsistencies. In several high-profile cases studied by criminal psychologists, this technique has led narcissistic suspects to inadvertently reveal critical details. Believing they're in control, they provide timelines, motivations, or explanations that can later be disproven. Their desire to appear clever becomes the very thing that exposes them. Another recurring theme is the narcissist's relationship with truth. For many, lying isn't stressful, it's strategic. Studies on deception indicate that narcissistic individuals experience less anxiety when lying compared to the general population. They often believe their own narratives, reshaping memories to align with their self-image. This doesn't mean they never crack. Narcissistic breakdowns do occur, but they look different. Rather than collapsing into remorse, they often unravel into rage, self-pity, or grandiose monologues. When their constructed identity starts to crumble, when evidence becomes undeniable, the emotional reaction is less about the crime and more about the loss of status and control. In interrogation footage analyzed by behavioral experts, these moments are unmistakable. The suspect's tone shifts, their body language becomes rigid or erratic. They may accuse investigators of betrayal or claim they're being persecuted. The mask slips, not to reveal guilt, but to reveal fragility beneath the grandiosity. It's important to clarify that narcissism alone does not cause criminal behavior. Most individuals with narcissistic traits never commit violent crimes. However, when narcissism intersects with factors like entitlement, lack of empathy, and external stressors, it can lower the psychological barriers that typically prevent harm to others. Forensic profiling emphasizes context. Childhood trauma, attachment issues, and learned behavior all play roles. Many narcissistic offenders display histories of unstable relationships, hypersensitivity to rejection, and chronic need for validation. In interrogation rooms, these patterns resurface in real time. What makes true criminal interrogations so compelling is that they strip away theory and show behavior as it unfolds. There's no editing, no dramatization, just raw human psychology under pressure. And in the case of narcissistic suspects, that psychology often reveals itself through control, contradiction, and charisma rather than fear. Understanding these dynamics isn't about fascination with crime, it's about awareness. These same traits appear in non-criminal contexts, workplaces, relationships, and leadership positions. Interrogation rooms simply amplify what already exists. As viewers, when we watch these interrogations, we're witnessing more than investigations. We're seeing how identity, ego, and power operate when the stakes are at their highest. We're watching people fight not just for freedom, but for their self-concept. And that brings us back to the question we started with. What kind of mind feels powerful under interrogation? The answer isn't simple, but the patterns are real, documented, and deeply revealing. If you've made it this far, you're clearly interested in understanding the psychology behind real crimes, not sensationalism, but truth. And this channel is dedicated to exploring exactly that. If you want more deep dives into real criminal interrogations, psychological analysis, and the science behind human behavior, make sure to subscribe. If this video gave you insight, clarity, or a new perspective, hit the like button. It helps the channel reach others who value thoughtful, fact-based content. And if you want to stay connected, turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. Because the more we understand the mind, the better we understand the world, and sometimes the darkest rooms reveal the most about human nature.